Welcome, everybody, to the PI Education March webinar, the almost monthly webinar. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Your usual host, Hal Humphreys, is teaching in California today, and he sends his regrets. So you're stuck with me, and I'm Kim Green, editor of Pursuit Magazine and married to Hal. Total coincidence. I'm here with our amazing guest, Erika Krouse. Erika, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Erika Krouse is an award-winning writer of fiction and nonfiction. She's published a novel, 2 short story collections, and tons of short fiction in great places like The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Plowshares, other badass publications like that. She has serious literary chops, and she's just released a new memoir, Tell Me Everything, the story of a private investigation. It's about a landmark Title IX lawsuit she investigated in the mid-90s, but it's about so much more than that. It's getting great reviews. The New York Times Book Review calls it a beautifully written, disturbing, and affecting memoir, and I totally agree. Let me just mention here that this is a memoir, which means true story as remembered by Erika, with names changed for legal and humane reasons, so she won't be able to answer any questions about the actual people or the university mentioned in the book. But let's get her to tell you all about it. Erika, congratulations, by the way. Your book just came out, what, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it feels like it's 2 years, but it's been 2 weeks. Yeah, thank you.
And so the New York Times, Slate, a great Washington Post review came out just yesterday. Like, what a whirlwind. How is it going so far?
I keep saying that I feel like, those fainting goats that just, they're like frolicking along and then they hear a big noise and then they just keel over like with stiff legs. I'm kind of in fainting goat mode right now. But it's all good, it's just startling, because I don't know, we're introverts, so we're not really used to any kind of attention at all. So it's
Right.
good.
And probably short story collections, even when they're excellent and your stories are in the New Yorker, you don't necessarily get a ton of attention most of the time, right?
Yeah, no one really pays attention to short stories. They pretend to, they might like buy it, but then it just goes on their shelf and they don't necessarily read it. So it's a different world with memoir, really. People tend to read it more quickly or they read it at all, and so it's been different, but good. Again, it's good. So.
Well, let's get into it a little bit. So I loved this book. I could not. It was a page turner for me, which is a really strange thing to say to someone about the story of their actual life, you know. But it's true. And so I wanted to talk about how you started the story. It's so interesting. So chapter 1, if I remember right, is the title is The Face.
Right.
And the first sentence of your book is, I became a private investigator because of my face.
Mhm.
So why did you start the story like that?
Well, I thought about it a lot. How do you begin any story about your life? Because you've got your whole life to choose from, and it's pretty overwhelming. But I really wanted to stay targeted on this case because this was the first ever Title IX sexual assault case in history. And it was also my first big case as a PI. So I really wanted to sort of stay focused on the job. And I really, really like to read about work anyway. I love reading, any, like, I think you interviewed Ellen McGarrahan, for, did I say her name right? McGarrahan?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, yeah, for two, like I love reading about work. I love reading about PI work, etc. So I really wanted to make sure that this memoir really stayed true to that. And I thought, well, how do you enter a profession? How did I enter the profession? And it really was, I just have that kind of face. I look like everyone else. Everyone thinks I'm their third grade friend, and also that's also how you begin a relationship with someone, right? The first thing you really see is their face, and that's how you enter their life and they enter yours, is through faces, facial expressions, facial, connection, really. So I kind of wanted to talk about that as well, like, again, but in my case it was my innocuousness that landed me the job, because I didn't go out to become a private investigator. It really is just, I have that kind of face where everyone just tells me everything in the middle of whatever they're doing. And then the right person did that. You know, this attorney in a bookstore just started talking to me about his life, and then was kind of appalled he was doing that. And then I said, it's okay, it's just my face, it's just people talk to me. And then he said, he thought like, wait a second, I can use this in my practice, I need this in my practice. And then from there I started working from him for him, and then the case, and then I started working on this case.
Right. And in the book, this is not his real name, but you call him Grayson in the book.
Grayson, yeah.
Right. That was going to be my next question. That moment in the bookstore where you two met. So, kind of set the scene. What was going on in your life and in your work at the time? You were already a fiction writer. You had done well, but like when he suggested you could be a private investigator, you could work with me. What did you think? Like, did you think what, or did you feel a little bit thrilled by it, or did you also kind of just need a gig, or what?
All of it. I was totally broke. I mean, I was living in this like kind of smelly basement. You know, they called it garden level, but like it was just a basement. It was literally the size and shape of a one-car garage. It was gross, you know, and I had no money. I was temping, and the reason I was temping was I was actually inspired by a friend of mine who really, she didn't want to sort of have the safe career that she would do while she pursued her artistic career. She just wanted to have the artistic career, so she's like, but I still need money, so she would temp. And I was like, I can do that with writing, you know. That's a, you know, and I actually could. I lived that way, right? So I temp at these terrible little jobs, and then so I didn't have any money, you know, and I was just used to taking terrible temp jobs. So when he offered me like a cool job, you know, with a decent, like a good salary, even though it's part time, you know, I was like, well, that's what I clearly need to be doing. So that was kind of exciting, um, but there was also the, sorry if you hear my dog. The mail, it might get loud here, I'm just saying. But the hard thing though is I was like, I don't know how to do that job. But I had never really known how to do any of my jobs, including writing, you know. Like I never really felt like I was qualified for any of them, and I really faked my way through almost all of them. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a shot. And what a strange and cool thought. And I wonder how long this will last is part of what I was thinking. Because again, I didn't know what I was doing at first. Or
How did the first so right in the book you talk about that, how like some of the early cases you didn't feel like things were really going all that great. So talk about that. Like, did you have some missteps, or just like some early hard lessons, or just felt like you were groping around in the dark, or what was that like?
Yeah, so if you know, the lawyer that I was working for, he was, before he this Title IX case landed in his lap, he was a medical malpractice lawyer, and he did personal injury. So he was like, I mean, he wasn't like the call 911, you know, 5555 guy, you know, like with the finger guns or anything. He wasn't doing that. You know, he was like a real lawyer, but he did take these kinds of cases. So I mean, I did one that was like a maternal death. So I'm like showing up pretending I'm pregnant at at a hospital, and no, no one's talking to me at all. I'm just trying to find witnesses everywhere. I didn't really know how to look or where to look or what to do. And he was pretty vague, you know. He's like, well, just find me something, as if I could like conjure up witnesses to an accident somehow. So I wasn't doing very well before this case began, and it turns out that that's really not the kind of PI I was or am. You know, I'm just not that kind of like gumshoe gonna find somebody person. I mean, I can do skip tracing and that kind of stuff, but like I'm really more the kind of person who does better with a big case, you know, where I can think creatively and like, okay, well, this is connected in this way and this connected in this way, and sort of create like a spider web of connections so I can find things. That's just better suited to me, really. And I think every PI has to sort of figure out like what kind of PI am I, and what what skills do I have that I can apply to which kinds of cases, you know.
Right. And so then that big case comes along.
Right.
And that's pretty early in your story here. And this would be for, I think, a lot of PIs, this would probably be the case of a lifetime. So
It was.
so tell us, set that up, give us the backstory, and just where was it? What was that lawsuit,
Right.
and where did it stand when you joined the case?
So that lawsuit, it was so what had happened the night of the crime of the first crime. I mean, this is like one crime that ballooned into 11. 11 that came forward. There were just as many people who didn't come forward. But the original crime was a woman that I call Simone. She she was having a girls' night in with her friends, and they were playing a drinking game, and they all got very intoxicated, and they thought they were being safe because they were home. And then all of a sudden, unbeknownst to her, her friend had invited over um, some football players, and the football players, it was a recruiting weekend for the college football team. So all of a sudden, I think the first wave was 20 football players are at her door and at this and just come into her small apartment. A lot of things began happening, not just to her. They trashed it. Other people were assaulted. All these cell phones were stolen. But that didn't happen right away. At first, it was 20 people, and then 10 more people showed up. So there were like over 30 people in this apartment. Um, she's already from the gate. She's not, she's intoxicated, not equipped to handle this. So she goes to her bedroom, lies down. She wakes up to, at first we didn't know quite the number. So, and she didn't know the number. So 5 to 8 people, big, large men, surrounding her bed and undressing her in the dark. They raped her in many ways, and then several did, and then again trashed the place, and then left. So that's the original crime. As we kept investigating, we kept finding out that more and more and more and more people were assaulted. Not some that night, a few more that, 2 more that night, and also over this season, previous seasons, in connection to recruiting parties, which were kind of like rampages. And so that's the crime. Now that should have been tried in criminal court, right? It's a rape, and it was pretty. The police called it. I think they called it. They didn't call it incontrovertible, but they said basically like this is like blatantly a crime, right? But the DA wouldn't take the case. So, and I can talk a lot about that, about like prosecutorial timidity, but they wouldn't take the case. So it had to go to civil, right? It had to be a civil case if it was going to be tried. And what Simone wanted was a change. She really said, this isn't okay, and you can't do this, and this hurts people, and this is a bad system, and it has to stop. So that's why and Title IX had never been used before for sexual assault. It had only been used for facilities and jerseys and fields and money. So this firm and Grayson came up with the idea, like, wait a second, maybe this is part of a recruiting party. Football teams are funded by the university. The university is funded by the state. This is Title IX, by federal government. This is Title IX. This is a Title IX problem. This means discrimination. This is the university is not protecting women and giving equal opportunity to everybody, and they're taking our money and funding a system that is hurting women. So mostly women.
Right, because what you were going to end up having to do, right, is as you unfold this story, you tell us Grayson kind of had to steer you away from zooming in on the individuals and tell the bigger story of this system that, as you're saying, wasn't protecting women. So what were you going to have to prove to
Mm-hmm.
make it into a Title IX case that was systemic and not a series of crimes against people?
Right, right. How to show a system really is what we had to do. So we had to prove a bunch of things. First of all, you have to prove that the crime took place, right? So there are all those criminal requirements, the simple requirements, like was it a crime? Who, what, when, where, and who did it, right? So we had to do that. But plus, we also had to show that this university knew about it and that they were what was called deliberately indifferent. So that was the legal standard. So we had to show that they knew about it. They could have, they knew about it enough to take a stance of what was called deliberate indifference. Now that's really hard to show, right? It's also hard to show that that they knew about it, and we couldn't just show that someone at the university knew about it. We had to show that the upper echelon of management knew about it. So like the coaches, athletic director, president, those kinds of people, and those kinds of people really protect themselves from that kind of knowledge. They say, well, they don't want to know because it makes them liable and it makes them have to make a decision that they don't want to make, right? So that was very, very hard to do, and it was just this, two steps forward, one step back kind of situation of constantly, we get sort of close. We'd be like, okay, well, this recruiter hired prostitutes for the recruits, and keep in mind these are like 16, 17-year-old boys coming into a system, and like the university's hiring prostitutes for them, but no, it's not okay. It's not going to work for us enough because he's lower management. He's just a recruiter. He's not the coach. So then you have to say, okay, well, who ordered him to do that? And then, but people are afraid, and they're not going to say, oh, well, that came from above, right? Because then they'll never work again, really, So it's just that it was this big system and this big. I thought it was a cover up, and it was very much like a government cover up of like crimes and things. It felt very cloak and dagger and hush hush, and it was, and people were afraid. They were afraid not just because of the power of the university, but they were also afraid because of the power of these individual players. You don't want to take on an entire football team.
They're big stars. They are not just large men, but they are big men on campus. They're protected.
Right.
They're worshipped, and
the fans, their fans will just, they'll do anything to protect their team.
The team, the coaches, they're all stars, and there's a lot of money involved, a lot of money behind them, and so here you are. A fairly new accidental private investigator, and it's suddenly your job to uncover this giant conspiracy, and the system does not want you to uncover it. A lot of ordinary people don't want you to uncover it, and a lot of the witnesses, some victims, potentially even maybe some perpetrators, your job is to go out and talk to those people and try to convince them to talk about something that they don't want to come out. So no pressure. Not a hard job at all.
Right.
And I'm going to kind of steer you back just a tiny bit in the story, because there's a moment that I loved in the early pages, and it's where this case has come up and you're actually wondering, because it felt personal to you because of your history, you're wondering whether you should take this case. Is it going to be too, do you have too much emotional baggage? Can you be objective, right? So you're asking yourself that. And here's the passage. So then you say, but there was Grayson in front of me, a mirage of idealism. He seemed hopeful. He seemed angry. He shone with it, anger at injustice, empathy for this girl, Simone. More than any of it, he seemed to think something could actually be done, that he could be the one to make things better, to change things forever. It struck me like an aftershock. I would do anything to feel like that.
Yeah. And we can go into this now. So one of the subplots of the book is that I am investigating a rape case, and I myself have a history with sexual violence and rape. So there's this, kind of conflicting thing in me. Like, I don't know if I'm qualified to do, am I going to be able to be objective? Am I going to be able to, are my feelings going to get in the way? Am I going to freak out? Am I going to flash back in the middle of an interview? Like, what's going to happen, right? So that was something I struggled with, not just at that point of decision, but all the way through. But at that moment, I was like, wow, because when you are sexually abused or or experienced sexual violence or harassment, or really anything that where those crimes are about power, right? So, and the point is, the perpetrator has power and you don't have any, and they can exert their power on you. So when you see like an opportunity to gain power around this subject, some kind of personal power, to make things better, power can be positive and negative, right? But like a positive power, that's catnip. I mean, it's really hard to resist the temptation to do something to help someone else, when no one else helped you, right? So
That's
that's
beautifully said, Erika. Thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful and brave how you were able to share and weave your personal story in with the story of the private investigation, and you did it so flawlessly, and it made complete sense why the two stories have to go together.
Mhm.
And in the pages we watch you find your power. I think, and I hope you felt that way about it. And that's the next one other passage that I'm thinking about this. And not only the power that you're talking about, the feeling of agency that maybe you could actually be a part of a wider quest for justice and do something for someone who no one has helped, who these young women who are up against a big system that doesn't care about them and isn't protecting them.
Right.
But you're also in these pages finding your power as an investigator, as an interviewer. And so there's this section where the way you tell the story, this section really kind of shows you finding that power. So you're interviewing a witness, Calliope.
Mm.
As Calliope talked, part of me stayed separate, watching myself, the way I sometimes did in relationships. I found myself pulling tricks I'd learned over decades of desperate socialization, inventing new techniques right there at the table. I kept my hands always in Calliope's view and gestured with open palms. I matched her breathing, her posture. I took enough notes to make her feel important, memorizing the rest of what she'd said so I didn't have to break eye contact for too long. When she was vague, I acted bored, only resuming eye contact when she disclosed something interesting. When she leaned back in skepticism, I stuttered so she'd feel sorry for me, and she leaned forward again. I gazed at her like she was the older, wiser one, like each fact uttered was the most important thing I had ever heard. You can find out anything if you listen that way. Was it fake? Did it matter? That's incredible. It's beautiful writing, of course, for one thing. But also like the way you tell the story, you're discovering right there something that you're great at and maybe you knew how to do all along. And suddenly you realize it, you can apply this thing, this talent to convince people to tell you things. So as you were discovering it, were you surprised by it? Was it natural? Did you cultivate it? A little bit of both?
Mm-hmm. And I want to stress, like, I think most people can do this, and I think most people do this. Really, I think it's something that we're doing right now, you and me. You know what I mean? So I think there's this, and it has a lot to do with, uh, just I think if you pay attention, period, and writers, such as yourself, pay attention to life, but even if you don't, even if you're like a really kind of not very observant person, you still have picked up so many of these social cues. There's so many things that we say that have nothing to do with our words. I think people like scientists calculate that like 80% of our communication is nonverbal, right? So there's and it's not that we ever took a class in that, that's stuff we've learned. But when you're consciously applying it, it's different. It's like you're learning what you already know. So I think there was this surprise that I did know some of this stuff, that I could use it, deliberately, instead of just sort of flailing into a social situation, which is usually what I do. So it was a really that was really kind of fun to discover, and it also was morally compromising, because it's like, okay, say we all have these like secret weapons hidden all over our bodies, right? We don't pull them out, right? We don't deliberately use them. We just have them. It's like things we carry, right? But what happens when you start using these skills that we learned deliberately to find something out, to get something from someone, to get an end to that's more than just connection. What does that mean, right? And that was for me. It was, you know, again, it was surprising to figure out that I could use these things, these ideas, um, deliberately, but it was also, it felt a little scary, I guess is the best word, because I was like, where is it going to end, really? You know, because if this is just what I'm coming to the table with, what if I start studying this stuff? What if I really start thinking about it and start gathering more tools, more skills, more abilities to sort of like turn on somebody? Where's it going to end, and where's the line? You know, where does it start being wrong? You know, and that was something that I had to contend with the whole case.
I think you're surely not alone in the virtual room we're in right now.
Mm.
I imagine, first of all, to go back to something you said earlier, I am sure you're not alone among private investigators at having been having experienced violence personally and having to carry that into your work and figure out, how do I do that? How do I maintain some professional distance and do the job properly? But also, like, how do I ethically use these powers for almost like pretending to connect to get something that I want from someone for the job?
Right.
But you know, we're all weighing the wider idea of justice for the case. You're weighing
Mm-hmm.
your client's interest against this moment of what a witness needs and whether it's in that witness's interest to tell you the thing, whether they may have to suffer some consequences.
Yeah.
And I think everyone has to weigh that. So that makes sense. But here, I think what people are going to love is that they see you weighing it right here on the page, the
Mm-hmm.
things that most people have often don't say aloud and certainly don't write down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyway, so that's what's so interesting to me. But let's talk. I think what people are going to love is, let's talk in detail about some of these actual tricks that you use, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, like, the guy who reviewed your book for the New York Times, he's apparently also a PI, and
Mm-hmm.
he somehow, like, he isn't buying the idea that it's your face that's getting people to confess things.
Right.
He calls BS on it. Whatever, you know, he can if he wants to, but it's your story, right?
Right.
But he says, I think in a way he's being generous. He says, I think it's the quality of her deep attention, the way you listen, um, that is really what's getting people to talk to you. And so maybe it's both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about how in the moment when you're interviewing some, you know, in the passage we talk about having your palms up, matching the breathing,
Mm-hmm.
selectively taking notes, selectively making eye contact, rewarding the behaviors you want, not
Mm-hmm.
rewarding the behaviors you don't. So what are these tricks of observation and mirroring that you're using? Talk about that.
Right. So, you know, there are two directions that it goes in, I think. There's what you take in from the other person, and there's also what you put out, right? So again, like what I put out often is innocuousness. Like there's, so when you talk with a witness, I'm sure you know this, and many people who are listening know this. You're taking on roles, right? It's their role to be interesting, and it's your role to be interested, right? But it's not your role to be interesting, and it's not really their role to be interested, right? So you're both agreeing on this sort of structure, right? Like even right now we have a structure. Your role is to be the interviewer. My role is to try and be interesting somehow. So like that again. So but we agree on the roles, and we're comfortable with the roles, and so within that framework. Then you have a lot to work with, because you both have agreed to be there for that reason, right? Or maybe they haven't agreed, right? Which in which case you have a different role. So as long as you establish some kind of role, so there's what you're putting out there is your role, right? And what you're taking in is what you see, and that's always dynamic, and what you hear, right? And just picking up on certain things in the person. I think it's not ever a static thing. Like when people talk about, oh, body language, you know, oh, well, crossed arms mean this, and if someone's feet are pointed toward the exit door, it means they want to leave. Well, maybe they just have to go to the bathroom. You know, you don't know what's going on. So you have to pay attention to what's happening, what they say, and what happens as they say it, right? And then let that conversation be dynamic, and and have it follow your own rhythm. So when I talk about like taking in, for example, say a person, you know, looks a little funny and say, "Are you okay?" And they say, "I'm fine," right? That's one thing. I'm fine, right? But if they go, "I'm fine," I'm fine, right? Those are two very, very different things. The first thing is, no, don't worry, I'm fine, right? Like, I, I'm connected to you. I don't want you to worry about me. I actually care about what you think, right? The second is, I'm saying I'm fine, but I'm not fine, and it's none of your freaking business, okay? Get away, right? The first one is we're friends. The second is we're adversaries, right? So what do you do in each situation? In the friend one, you follow that, oh, we're friends, oh, because sometimes you might do the like, try and sort of like they're here and you're next to them, saying like, oh, sometimes I feel uncomfortable when a stranger asks me questions, and you establish kind of rapport, and and they'll say, oh, no, 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 don't worry, and then you sort of are both sort of taking care of that conversation. You're both engaging on that sort of way. But if someone's like, I'm fine, right? I would say, no, you're not. You're not fine. Everything about you is saying you're not fine. And then I just like it, because they are saying, I want to be your adversary. I'm saying no to you, And I'd say, oh yeah, so okay, I'm going to say no to you, and then we do that, right? And then I can get more information from them by following their rule and disrupting it a little bit. Right? Not doing the polite thing, not being like, okay, you're saying back off, I'm going to back off. No, I don't. You don't back off, right? Because you're after something, right? And they know it. So you're gonna sort of connect on that different adversarial kind of way and spar, right? So it's about following the moment and following what they're doing in the moment and honoring it, but not necessarily respecting the way they want it to go, right? Another like there so that sort of leads me into like another area that I think really helps with interviewing, which is that you don't follow the social cues, right? So for example, someone's talking and they say, da 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 da. The way we talk is we create these little barbs in the conversation, right? We'll say, oh, that's when I was in Canada, but that's a long story. And then they move on, right? Well, that's a long story. Instead of that's a cue, like, back off, I'm not going to talk to you about that. But what you do say is, what's the long story? You pick up on the barb in the conversation, whatever it is, the thing that doesn't fit. And then they say, oh, well, and they'll be vague. They'll say, oh, some bad stuff happened to me in Canada. And you'll say, what bad stuff happened to you? And then you follow it and you follow it, and people do generally kind of want to disclose, because they wouldn't have said it if they hadn't wanted in some part of them to disclose, right? So so you just follow the trail instead of letting them lead you on the nicer path. And a third tool, I think, along those lines that works really well is silence. A lot of people are uncomfortable with it. So again, it doesn't follow social cues to just let silence be. So if someone's talking just like you are right now, Kim, you just listen and you nod and you wait for them to be done. And often they'll just keep talking. And when they keep talking, they often say something that you want them to say, right? It's almost
What
like
about
they're
right,
avoiding
right.
the dangerous waters, and then they jump in.
Right, right. And so also something you mentioned at some point, yes witnesses and no witnesses.
Oh, I
Tell,
love
tell
this.
us that. Tell us that trick.
Right. So I probably, in our conversation right now, I'm probably a yes witness, right? So there are people who want to say yes to you, and there are people who want to say no to you. And that depends on a lot of factors, right? It depends on the whole reason you're coming to them in the first place. Do they want to tell you about the thing or not tell you about that thing? It depends on who they are as a person. Are they an accommodating kind of person? Or are they kind of like a belligerent kind of person? Are they cranky? Did they have their coffee that day? Whatever. It really depends on all these different factors. So each conversation will be different. And you can't say, oh, well, I can't say Kim Green, she's a yes witness all the time, because day by day, minute by minute, it's going to change. But if there's somebody who's, for example, a yes witness, I'll say, you pose the question so that they can say yes to you. You can say like, okay, you knew about this party then, and they'll say, well, yeah, I know a fair amount. I know what I know, and I know what my friend knows, and yeah, I know, so they get to say yes. But say there's a no witness, someone who does not want to talk to you. You say something like, you didn't know anything about this party. And they'll say, no, I knew about it. Well, you knew about it? And then, well, I knew some. And then you go back to some kind of other no question, like, but you don't want to talk, you can't talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about it, right? Something that will trigger their pride, or their no. No, I can talk about whatever I want to. I have the right to talk about anything I want to talk about. I can tell you, you're not going to tell me. You're not going to tell me who it is. I'll tell you, So that kind of thing, you just try and get the no in the direction that you want. And it's a little harder to think of those questions on the fly. You can tell, like right now, I was like, but if you can sort of, again, use your other tools of silence to collect yourself, and also just keep going in that that train of thought, you can get answers from people that you can't necessarily get answers from before.
How do you make the initial approach? Do you do it the same way every time, or do you kind of gauge who is this person? How likely are they to be hostile? And what do you do?
So with this case, it was pretty interesting because some people were like, absolutely, I want to support Simone. I want, they were just like, when can we meet? How soon? How about now? But most of the time it was the opposite. Most of them were like, football team is the most amazing thing in the world. You people are criminals. You have no idea of what sacrifices these people need to make, and she's lying. So those were most of the people I was talking to. So I had to sort of understand who they were before I made that initial contact. Sometimes I made it by phone, and the thing though is I had to do a lot of preparation, because I knew that if I did connect with someone, it was very unlikely they were going to take a second call from me. I was really going to get, with these kind of more hostile witnesses, I had to get everything I needed in that one conversation. So I do a lot of that, and then in the phone, and then they'd say, well, I'm at work right now. I can't talk to you. And then but sometimes they'd give me a number, or they'd say, well, I can talk to you right now. And again, I had to use those like tricks sometimes to get them to talk to me in the moment. And then if it went well, I'd say, I have more questions for you. Can I meet with you? I can't promise anything more than, beer and food, but it's on me. And I'd always make sure they knew that. And then sometimes they would meet with me, and we'd meet in a bar, like a bar or restaurant or something like that. And sometimes they'd meet with me because they were curious. I used that, like, I'm a PI line a lot, because it's like, people had never met a PI. They kind of wanted to see, who are you anyway? What is this going to be like? Is this going to be like that movie that I saw, or not? And so they want to be able to maybe have a story to tell their friends. So we'd go from phone usually to venue, and then once we found a venue, if they would meet with me even again, same venue, same time of day. Like, I tried to replicate all the circumstances of our first in-person meeting as much as I could. Of course, I let them control it usually, but consistency was going to be our key, because usually we wanted these people to testify, and the more stable I could be in that relationship, the more likely they were to form an attachment, and then perhaps work, help us with the case. So that's kind of how it went usually. Yeah.
And then that attachment kind of brings us back to what you were saying earlier, like the question of how sometimes in your story you write about how this gift of rapport almost feels like a dark art in a way. And because sometimes, and specifically when you were writing about Daisy, maybe you could tell us a little bit about her if you don't mind. She felt like at one point, Grayson, the attorney, tells you she thinks you're friends.
Yeah.
And in a way, like, in a way, it felt in the pages like you almost were, but of course, not exactly, not really. It's not an equal friendship. So tell us about her and tell us about how you dealt with that kind of
Mm-hmm.
like the ethical conundrum of letting someone believe that you have a real connection.
Right. Well, we did have a real connection. So Daisy was, but it was, but it didn't have a label. So I want to come back to that. But so Daisy, she was a sex worker. She's actually a madam. She had several. She called them girls working underneath her, and the one of the recruiters for the football team would hire these girls, women. They were like, 30-year-old women, to service these incoming recruits who were 16, 17 years old, sometimes players. So this was part of the recruiting bait, like come here, you're going to get laid. And it happened a lot, a lot. And it wasn't just, sex workers. It was also, there was, they hired strippers and had stripping parties. And so there was a lot of sex used as a recruiting tool. In according to me, and also according to the DA. So I don't think I'm being, false in saying this, but so she knew everything. She knew how it worked. She knew how the money was kind of shifting around to, she didn't know how it was coming from the football program end, but she did know from the intake end how much money they were spending on these women. And as her coming forward ruined her life for a long time because she was recognizable. People would throw boiling hot coffee at her. Whenever she called them gas station moments, she'd be like filling up her gas station. People would throw boiling hot coffee at her or full slushies at her, and attack her for her involvement in exposing what the team was doing and its impact on the team, right? So she was being targeted, and that was really, was horrible. And I felt responsible, partly responsible. Our relationship wasn't a friendship, but like, hey, how you doing? Like, it wasn't like, let's go for coffee for no apparent reason. It was transactional in a way. I mean, it was like, I'm trying to get information, she's giving me information. That was our relationship. But I didn't feel involved with her. That's why I say, like, we were connected, very much connected. I respected her so much. She, maybe more than almost anyone else, she risked more to come forward than 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 most people. So she's a really amazing person, and I had all this respect for her, but our lives were so different, so very, very different.
And you cared what
So
happened to her, and you
very
were
much, yeah.
and you worried, and there were moments where you're wondering, okay, wait, is this crossing a line? Like she's
Yeah.
telling you, I can't get work. I don't want to do this work anymore, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't. People recognize me, and I can't do any other work. And she needed money,
Right.
and you had these sudden like, what do I do about that? And
I tried to get her a job. I mean, I was like making calls for her. I mean, like, but it was inappropriate, right? It was my lack of boundaries. If I had been more professional, I would have drawn a certain kind of line. But again, there are roles, right? There are roles that you're taking on, and that was part of our roles. Like, I I cared about the case. I cared about people who were, you know, survivors of sexual assault, and she was one too. So but plus I just cared about her. You really can't meet her and not care about her. She's kind of an amazing person. So so there was, so there was this sort of like, that was part of our roles, is we cared, and that's what brought us together. We were working together for this cause, and if we're working together, we should have each other's backs too. So it was confusing, honestly. And I never really felt like I landed quite in the right place with it. I never felt like I did. I never felt like I was quite professional enough, or professional in the right way, or unprofessional enough either. So that's the part of the case that does haunt me.
Maybe there's really just no such thing as balance, and it's just a word that should stop existing
I
in
love it.
connection
Thank you.
with work and life, you know. But
Right.
a lot of what you're saying reminds me so much of the conversation I had with Ellen McGarrihan, who we mentioned
Mm,
earlier, and her the interview about her book Two Truths and a Lie, because she
mhm.
also um, admits that she felt like she crossed boundaries and did things that were, well,
Dangerous. Dangerous.
dangerous and obsessed, you know. And she
Yeah.
talks, what we titled her webinar Obsession. That's the theme we agreed to. And she said obsession is a kind of a double-edged sword. It can make you really good at the job, and on TV all detectives are obsessed, right? And they
Right.
only live for work, and their private lives are a big mess.
Right.
But obsessing over the job can
Mm,
wreck the rest of your life, and
right.
especially when it's this personal, when you're caring about people. And when the case isn't going well, what PI, especially PIs who work criminal defense or big civil cases like this, where the stakes are high,
Mm,
everyone can identify with, like, the roller coaster of the case is going well, I'm riding high, to the
right.
case is imploding.
Right.
And you write about that so well, like all those complicated feelings of being on a high of winning, being in
Yeah.
despair when you're losing, the
Mm,
guilt of bringing people in only for it to not to work out, maybe feelings of failure, you know, grief. And
mhm.
Ellen McGarrihan calls it the downside of trying.
I love that. I love that. That's wonderful. It's true. Like you, when you're trying, you're throwing yourself into the void, right? There's uncertainty all around you. But and you're sort of hanging yourself in the balance and saying, "Oh, if it goes well, I'm good. If it goes well, I'm or goes poorly, I'm bad." Right? So your identity sort of gets caught in it. I think she's a really good writer, and that book is her book, Two Truths and a Lie, is really captured. I thought that feeling of like, you know, it, my identity hinges on this case and the outcome of this case and the information I can find out or not find out, right? Um,
And even Grayson, who had put, I mean, he
mhm,
put thousands of pro bono hours into it. He was more detached, it seemed,
mhm,
according to your telling, that he was able to kind of say, "Hey, it isn't working out right now," but and move on
right.
more than you were. And there's another a sentence that I wrote down because it was really memorable. It kind of it highlights the despair that you felt at one point. You had this feeling that justice wasn't blind; it was random.
Right. I still believe that. I still absolutely believe that. I feel like there's your ideal of justice, right? Like if justice exists, this will happen and this will happen. And sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes it goes your way. But I when I hear well the other cases I worked on, I kept seeing these decisions being made for political reasons, for especially in the prosecutor's office, like the DA's office. I kept seeing decisions made that had nothing to do with justice, had nothing to do with law, and what should, like our ideas of ethics and what should be, that we can even all agree on. I mean, I think almost all of us can agree on those ethical principles, but that's not what was happening. It was really about spin. It was about perception. It was, and I that really, it still bothers me a lot. So when you do get a win, when you do get like that, you do pull it off, it has all this back weight to it of all the things that didn't go right, right? All the cases that that should have that should have gone a certain way and didn't, and were either ignored um, or just thrown out, or you know. So yeah, I do still think justice is random.
It sounds like that's one of the big, I mean, maybe it's a misconception or a belief anyone has before you really get into any kind of, being a lawyer or being a PI. If you're not in the legal world, you maybe think of justice as this big shining ideal that is simpler than it ever turns out to be. And
Mhm.
and you show, like, if you go from that place where you're describing Grayson as, you look at him and you see his idealism, and
Mhm.
then the version of you who is saying justice is random. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a big disillusionment over the course of many pages. I mean, but
Yeah,
not
but
always a bad kind of disillusionment, right? Like
right.
it's realistic.
I mean, I talk about how disillusionment should be something we aspire to, because then you don't have illusions, right? Then you're free in a way to see what's really there, and we can get blinded by our ideals, but I do think we need them anyway. I mean, I'm very idealistic. I still have them. I do think justice is random, but it doesn't mean I don't believe in justice, right? And Grayson is an amazing person because he saw all the dirty. He knew all the dirty. You know, the problem being an attorney or a lawyer is the people you talk to all day are lawyers. so um, so he had to deal with all this. And also all the cheating and the lying and the corruption from the other lawyers and the other side. I mean, there's so much cheating that went on. It was bonkers, but he still had the idealism, and he still does today. I'm friends with him. I talked to him like the other day. So, you know, um, so that's, I think, for me, that was an incredible role model to see somebody who was able to walk through the mud and still kind of come out clean, right? I really admire him, and for me, that was something I wanted to be able to do as well. I didn't want to avoid the mud. I wanted to be in it. I wanted to be fighting, but I didn't want, to come out of that with some kind of intact idealism. It's a big feat, and it was wonderful to have that as a role model in front of me with him. Yeah.
It strikes me maybe that's the upside of trying,
Yeah.
is that you learn. I mean, what you're describing is the great big lesson of life, that you learn that the effort is still worth it, even
Mhm.
if it doesn't come out like you wanted.
That's kind of like writing, isn't it? Right? Like it didn't go out the way you wanted, but it's still worth it. You still grow as a person, and you still made something, right? Even if it didn't, if it's not your perfect, the ideal, the mirage that you have, that you're striving toward and reaching for. Yeah. And I think, I think investigation's the same, and that's why it's important, I think, to believe in your cases that you take, because and not everyone does, not everyone can. If you work for an agency, for example, sometimes you have to take some cases where you're like, this case stinks. This is a dirty case, and I'm protecting some jerk, who really doesn't. I'm trying to do something that's, staving off someone else's, guilty actions or something like that, right? So that those are some cases that people sometimes have to take, and when you do that, I think it's soul crushing, and it's kind of a soul death. But if you can believe in your cases, like I believed in this case, it was a very easy case to believe in, but if you can get something like that, it's such a gift, because then you have something that's worth it, right? Something that, where you can think that the ends possibly can justify some of your less ethical means that you go through to do the job.
So, what are some other misconceptions that you may have had about being a PI? Besides some shining idea about what justice was going to be like, and what are some other misconceptions that spending several years as a PI? What else did you learn about what it's really like?
So, I thought it was like you're sitting there with a camera, with a telephoto lens, and you're hiding, and there's stakeouts, and you have to pee in a bottle and all that kind of stuff. That's what I thought I would be doing, because I thought, well, that's what a PI is. I just, and again, I had certain kinds of cases. Like this was my first big case, but after that, I continued to work with Grayson, and we took on a lot of other similar cases. Really, being a PI is just talking to people. Really, that's what it's this, except I would be in your seat. So it's a little weird for me to be in this seat, I'll just tell you. But that's what it is. It's this kind of, let's connect here, and let's find a solution. Let's get some information, and work towards something. Work toward righting a wrong, or work toward finding out what really happened, and creating a change. So it's a very human. It's just such a human, enterprise, and it's for my brand of PI was very technology free. I didn't even record conversations because it made people uncomfortable, and I knew if I did it covertly, they'd feel it. So it was it was just very old school, and that's something that that was surprising to me. Another thing that was surprising to me is how much you need to get buy-in from your witnesses. So the cases I worked on, just because they told me something didn't mean that it would matter. I can't, I can't just say, oh, well, they told me and that's testimony. It didn't work. We had to get buy-in from them. We had to convince people. We had to do a lot of persuasion to get people to say, and there was no reason for people to really help us. But I had to say, okay, how about you risk your safety, potentially take on a whole bunch of enemies who are way bigger, stronger, and meaner than you, and are motivated to shut you up. And why don't you help us do something where that you want absolutely no connection to with your name, and you want to be kept completely anonymous, and you'll never get any praise ever, and you'll never get any reward. Will you do that with me? Let's do it. Let's do it together. Let's do it so we can make things better. Let's make a better world, and let's prevent this crime from happening. Are you on board? And in repayment, I will give you some beer and nachos. That's what's going to happen between us. And so that was to me a big surprise, that I had to sort of be in this sort of ridiculous position of recruiting people, which is kind of funny because we were doing this like recruiting, this recruiting mess, but I ended up being an actual kind of recruiter. For all those cases, and that's something I didn't know about PI work, right? Because I thought, okay, well, this person knows something, just subpoena them, but it doesn't work that way in civil cases. You subpoena someone who doesn't want to be there. They don't want to testify. They're not going to give you what the case needs. They're going to be upset with you, So we had to make friends, and we did make friends, friends.
So I don't know how much you want to say about this, for the spoiler sense of the book, although it is public record and
Okay.
people can probably easily figure out what case you're talking about and find out what happened. But do you want to say anything about kind of how it turned out? Like, did you come away feeling like there was some victory for some of the people you asked for their help?
Right. Yeah. So I absolutely can, because this is public. So ultimately, we won, but we had to lose first. So we went. This case was all over the place. When we were winning, we felt like we were losing. When we were losing, we felt like we were winning, and we didn't always know. There's a lot that was happening that we didn't know because of certain kinds of corrupt forces that were working, honestly. But it's actually a happy story. It's mixed happiness. It's not like, ooh, the world is healed, but it as these stories go, I'll tell you, most of them are not happy. Most of them, they end in disillusionment and bitterness and cynicism, and the justice system is broken and can never be fixed. And in this case, the justice system is still broken, but we did prevail in this case. So I think and I can't speak for how anyone else feels about this. I don't know how the witnesses felt, how the survivors felt. I don't know anything about that, but I do know what the impact was on law, and what this case did was it created new cases. It set the precedent, the legal precedents, right, or everything, right? So if this case had been thrown out and then stayed out, that would have been the precedent. No, you can't. No, you cannot use Title IX for sexual assault, right? Now, oh yes, you can, and you can win. So, so then other cases came forward rapidly, and it created different rules for recruiting with the NAACP. They had to change their policies because of this case. And schools started having things like Title IX coordinators. Those exist now. I don't know if you watched The Chair on Netflix, but there's this Title IX coordinator. I was like, we did that. We did that. That never would have existed. I mean, maybe there was one, maybe somewhere, in some school, but like definitely it wasn't really a big position, and now it exists, right? So there's this sort of more openness to this idea that a school is responsible for the safety of its students, and that was actually kind of a new idea because of this case. So I feel very proud of that. I feel proud to be associated with that. Of course, I didn't do it. I wasn't the lawyer. I wasn't any of the plaintiffs, but I feel very proud to be to have helped with that.
That is an amazing outcome, and you should feel proud of it. And I was just looking at some of the comments. One of our colleagues, Jason Addis, said, he's kind of laughing. He says, soul crushing. It's called criminal defense, right? So some of these folks who are listening, they do nothing but criminal defense, and can kind of get their heads around being a part of a sometimes broken, often broken system, even when they're working for someone who they don't necessarily want to invite over to dinner.
Yeah.
And I know you did some of that too. And it all is meaningful. And in this case, you had a great outcome. But I think even if you didn't, you should have been equally proud. I mean, it might not feel as good, but it's still, you did the hard work. And she wrote about it in this beautiful book. I know a lot of you said you've already ordered it. I hope you do. Tell Me Everything, the story of a private investigation, just came out 2 weeks ago. Eric, where can people buy your book?
Well, maybe bookstores, but there's supply chain issues, right? So I don't know. But you can definitely get it on like Bookshop, Amazon, those kinds of online. You can order it or the library if you don't have the money. You can. It should be around. I hope.
Is there an
So,
audiobook version?
yes, and oh my gosh, she's so good. Gabra Zachman she's done over 500 audiobooks, and she's the audiobook queen. She's amazing. So yeah, there's an audiobook for sure.
Well, congratulations again. Everyone, I
Thank
cannot
you.
recommend this book any more strongly. It's honest, it's beautiful, it's profound. It's not always an easy read, but the best things aren't. It's so worthwhile. Tell Me Everything. The story of a private investigation. And until next time, this is Pursuit Magazine, PI Education's monthly webinar, monthly-ish. Thanks everyone for being here. And most of all, Erika, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kim. You're a wonderful interviewer, and this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And I just ended the stream.
You're good. You're so good. I always